Hello, so today's presentation is about motivational interviewing and the transtheoretical model. So as usual, we will start off by looking at the roots. So starting off with motivational interviewing, this approach was developed firstly by Dr. William Miller from the University of New Mexico, and he was supervising a group of psychologists who were working with people who had problematic substance misuse issues. He started to notice the sorts of interventions that were working better than others and started to undertake some research and writing from 1982. And other people internationally started to pick up on his work, with one of those people being Dr. Stephen Rolnick from Cardiff University. They met and realised they were having the same thoughts and views about working with people motivationally, and they developed motivational interviewing together from 1991. So there was a move away from this medical or disease model, sometimes called the Minnesota model of substance misuse, which viewed substance misuse as a disease, whereas somebody might be able to recover but not be cured. This is linked with traditional approaches like Alcoholics Anonymous, working through the 12 steps. The social model was a little bit different and started to view substance misuse issues as a dependency issue as opposed to an addiction, and believed that substance misuse issues were socially learned and therefore could be unlearned. So you can see that there were influences from cognitive behavioural ideas, particularly ideas around cognitive dissonance. There were also ideas from social psychology that had an impact. So some theories around goal systems theory and goal setting theory also influenced the development of the approach. Really strongly influenced by the person-centered approach and the work of Carl Rogers. This was probably the most significant influence on the development of motivational interviewing. You'll notice some parallels also with some of the techniques of solution-focused approaches, which you'll notice a bit later in the presentation. So firstly, we need to develop our understanding of motivation, and there are some ideas around self-determination theory that have influenced our thinking about motivation. And this states that individuals with an external perceived locus of causality believe that external forces, other people or situations or factors, are responsible for instigating or forcing their actions. Whereas Deci and Ryan in 1985 found that where there is a higher internal perceived locus of causality, the individual will consider their behaviour to be of their own volition. And the assumption is that this is linked to motivation. So the traditional style within substance misuse services linked to the disease model encouraged more confrontational styles where somebody is challenged on their behaviour and their views about their substance use in this kind of confrontational manner. And that this leads to people being described as unmotivated, resistant or in denial. And you can reach a bit of an impasse. But if the goal is to promote long-term behaviour change, practitioners need to employ techniques that access internal motivation to change, as opposed to those that rely solely on external coercion. So internal factors include how actions fit with personal values or goals, and attitudes regarding capacity to change. So in conceptualising motivation in this way, there were three components identified. The first is importance, the extent to which someone wants to change. So recognises the reasons why change might be helpful or beneficial for them. Number two is their confidence. This is the extent to which someone believes they have an ability to change. So they might know that something's bad for them or unhelpful, but they may lack the confidence in their ability to be able to do it. And thirdly is readiness. So somebody might acknowledge that yes, they should change, but actually I'm not ready right now for a whole range of reasons. So the belief is that all three of these things need to be in place for somebody to have motivation to change. And that source of motivation is unique to everyone. So we really need to understand each individual's personal beliefs, values, and views about why a change might be effective for them. So in thinking about change as a process, I'm going to introduce the transtheoretical model of change, sometimes called the stages of change model or the cycle of change. And this was developed by Prochaska and Di Clementi in 1982 and emerged from their research of people who changed their smoking behaviour. But it has been broadened out to look at a whole range of behavioural changes, with the idea being that the process is the same. So I'm going to talk through the cycle. So this is, you'll see it represented in different ways. There is a little wobbly spiral in the middle, and this represents the fact that even if people go round the process without achieving long-term change, movement around is movement forward in their journey to change. So the theory goes that with any type of behaviour, we start from a position of pre-contemplation. And that's really when someone has no intention to change in the next 6 months or so. They may not see their behaviour as being problematic, or they might minimise the impact of the behaviour. If an individual comes into contact with services at this stage, it's usually because of extrinsic motivation. So, because, I don't know, a loved one has encouraged or forced, or maybe they've been in contact with the criminal justice system and been recommended to access services. So you don't generally get people volunteering to come into services to change something when they're at pre-contemplation stage, because they're not really thinking about change. But if somebody is starting to consider change, but without necessarily having a firm commitment to action, you're then in the contemplation stage. And this is where the idea of ambivalence is a significant characteristic. So this is the idea that the benefits resulting from a considered change must exceed the benefits of the problem behaviour and be sufficient, according to the perception of the individual, to justify the alterations and possible losses deriving from the behaviour change. So in contemplation stage, it's not really a very happy position, because even though you're still engaging in the problem behaviour, you sort of feel bad about it and you don't feel ready to do anything about it. So somebody might be in contemplation stage for quite a significant period of time. And then hopefully at some point the balance tips, where someone recognises that the problems associated with the behaviour are so significant that actually there's a benefit in trying to stop it and make a change. So this is where they may move into the preparation stage, where somebody starts to actively plan for change. It might be they set a date, it might be they access services, all sorts of things that people do to prepare. So this is the first step towards modifying the behaviour, where somebody's adopting a new attitude and making decisions. There's usually a period of between 3 and 6 months when new behaviour patterns start to become established, perhaps modified and discontinued. So in action stage, if somebody is fully resolved in their ambivalence and motivated to change, then quite often the action stage is a time where people feel very engaged and positive about change and are working really hard at developing new behaviours. The next stage is the maintenance stage. So this is where somebody is sustaining and integrating new habits that maybe replace the behaviour. A behaviour can be considered established and stable when it is automatically executed without the need to expend excessive energy or effort in order to maintain it. This stage is seen to be at least 6 months, but could be longer. So I guess maintenance stage quite often is a stage where people can start to struggle, because it's some time after they've made a change, but it's still quite hard. And then you've got the relapse stage, And this was integrated into the model to try and normalise it, to say that actually lapses are a normal part of change, that you will slip up at times, but actually what you do at those times can have a significant impact on whether you're likely to be successful or not. So a lapse is seen as a momentary return to the problem behaviour, whereas a lapse is more prolonged. And quite often if people have a lapse, because maybe of their self-esteem, they can feel quite negative about it, and maybe even move back to pre-contemplation stage for some time, where they think, well, there's no point even thinking about change because I just can't do it. I might as well just accept that I am a smoker, a drinker, a biscuit eater, whatever it is. So this is linked to the motivational interviewing model because it was seen as being helpful in terms of understanding the process of change and to help assess when motivational interviewing might be an appropriate strategy. So in the words of Miller and Rolnick, motivational interviewing is a client-centered directive method for enhancing intrinsic motivation to change by exploring and resolving ambivalence. And there is a spirit that's suggested as being fundamental to implementing motivational interviewing. The first is collaboration, not confrontation. The second is evocation, and this is recognising that the clients are expert in their situations and experiences, and they hold the motivation, strengths and resources to make a change. And the third is autonomy, not authority. So moving on to the 4 principles that underpin motivational interviewing. The first is to express empathy. So this comes from Carl Rogers' person-centered approach. And so it's not enough to just feel empathy, but actually it needs to be expressed. And very much advocated is this idea of reflective listening to help in understanding and accepting the individual's point of view. And this is seen as fundamental to building rapport that may help in moving somebody forward in resolving ambivalence. The second is to develop discrepancy. So this is discrepancy between the individual's problem behaviour and its effect on their life and the lifestyle they would like to assume. So the difference really between where they are now and where they might like to be. So the third principle is to roll with resistance, and this really comes out of what Miller noticed in relationships between psychologists and substance users, was that when a psychologist started to make arguments for the service user for change, that actually often what it did in the service user was push them to argue the opposite. So to actually argue why they can't change, and that clearly was very unhelpful. So when you encounter resistance, resist the urge to make arguments for why the person should change. And finally, to support self-efficacy. So support the service user to build their belief that they can change and that they are responsible for change. So there are also a number of micro skills that are advocated with this approach. So widespread use of open-ended questions, affirmations, which are positive feedback on strengths, which is genuine and sincere. Guess again that reflects Carl Rogers' work. Reflective listening and giving empathetic responses which show that you're listening. And these include focusing on feelings and paraphrasing, which focuses on content, and summaries. So some really good techniques that can be used to help somebody work through that ambivalence. So the goal is to elicit and encourage change talk. So you're seeking to note any self-motivational strategies, acknowledge and reflect these statements back. Change talk happens when the service user comes up with their own reasons for change. And there are different types of change talk that have been identified. So when the service user mentions the disadvantages of the status quo, of things continuing as they are now, or when they mention the advantages of change, or their optimism for change or intention to change. So really noticing these statements, acknowledging them and reflecting them back. So scaling questions are used to explore someone's perception of change, and they can be quite helpful. You do need to ask people's permission to do scaling, but it can be quite helpful to get into a conversation about where people are at in terms of those three elements of motivation we talked about earlier: importance, confidence and readiness. So asking, on a scale of 0 to 10, how important is it for you to make this change? What does this number mean to you? Why are you at that number and not 0? What would need to happen for you to move to a higher number? What can I do to help you move to a higher number? So you can see that gets you into this conversation that can explore ambivalence and motivation, and can help you then apply some of the other techniques like the reflective listening, where you're reflecting back some of those self-motivational statements. And these are your references for the presentation today.